On April 2nd, 2025, global financial markets were thrown into chaos. The S&P 500 plummeted by 4.88%, and the Nasdaq recorded its largest point loss in history. President Donald Trump had just announced a 10% baseline tariff on all imports, with even higher rates for 57 countries. The average U.S. tariff rate surged from 2.5% in early 2025 to 27%. This is the highest level in nearly 100 years since the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, with tariffs on China reaching as high as 145%. The world trembled once again at the specter of a trade war. But America's tariff policy is not a new story. In fact, tariffs have been a core economic policy shaping the nation's destiny since its founding. Today, we examine 250 years of American tariff history, the endless battle between protectionism and free trade, and the global impact it has created. On July 4, 1789, the 13th anniversary of American independence, the U.S. Congress passed a historic bill, America's first tariff law. This was not merely an economic policy. It was a survival strategy for a fledgling nation with shattered finances after the Revolutionary War. The first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, established tariffs as the federal government's primary revenue source. At that time, approximately 90% of U.S. government revenue came from tariffs. Hamilton sought to use tariffs to pay off the massive debts accumulated during the Revolutionary War and build a strong federal government. In 1790, Hamilton reached a historic compromise with Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. The federal government would assume the state's war debts in exchange for locating the capital on the border between Virginia and Maryland in the South. The key funding source for this compromise was tariffs. Hamilton proposed paying off bonds with new import tariffs, which became the foundation of the American financial system. However, by the mid-19th century, tariffs became a flashpoint that divided America. The industrialized North wanted industrial protection through tariffs. Meanwhile, the South, dependent on cotton exports, vehemently opposed high tariffs, claiming they hindered their exports. When the so-called Tariff of Abominations passed in 1828, Southern fury reached its peak. South Carolina threatened secession, claiming the right to nullify federal law. The tariff issue, intertwined with slavery, eventually led to the Civil War. After the North's victory, America established itself as a protectionist nation. In the 1922, America entered the Roaring Twenties. As the sole victorious nation after World War I, American manufacturing reached its zenith. Automobiles, household appliances, mass production. America became the world's factory, but crisis lurked beneath the prosperity. October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday, the New York Stock Exchange crashed. However, many economists say this alone cannot explain the Great Depression. In fact, by early 1930, stock prices began showing signs of recovery. President Herbert Hoover even declared the economic crisis over in May of that year. But on June 17, 1930, one piece of legislation shattered all hope. A tariff law proposed by Republican Senator Reed Smoot of Utah and Representative Willis Hawley of Oregon, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. This law imposed tariffs averaging 59%, up to 400% on over 20,000 imported goods. The stated purpose was to protect American farmers and workers hit by the Great Depression. 1,028 economists submitted a petition warning of adverse effects. Henry Ford, founder of Ford Motor Company, and Thomas Lamont, chairman of J.P. Morgan, personally visited the White House to persuade President Hoover. But Hoover succumbed to pressure from his party and parts of the business community, signing the bill into law. The result was catastrophic. Canada retaliated first. In May 1930, Canada imposed new tariffs on 16 items, accounting for 30% of U.S. exports. Britain, France, Germany, Italy followed. The entire world plunged into a retaliatory tariff war. Economic historian John Steele Gordon argues that the Great Depression began not on October 29, 1929 with the stock market crash, but on June 17, 1930 with the enactment of the Smoot-Hawley Act. Indeed, in the first year of the Depression in 1929, stock prices fell only about 11%. But from 1930 onwards, when the tariff law took effect, the decline over the next decade exceeded 90%. Global trade volume plummeted from $36 billion in 1929 to $12 billion in 1933, a two-thirds reduction. U.S. exports were cut in half, and unemployment exceeded 25%. In Cuba, sugar tariff increases collapsed the economy, leading to the 1933 revolution. This became the genesis of Cuba's anti-American sentiment that continues today. Economist Joseph Schumpeter assessed, the Republican tradition of treating tariff increases as household medicine spread the Great Depression worldwide and even planted the seeds of World War II. Indeed, in Germany, Italy, and Japan, economic crisis led to the rise of extreme nationalism and fascism. In the 1932 election, Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt won. His pledge was clear: lower tariffs. In 1934, Roosevelt and Congress passed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act. This law allowed the president to negotiate tariff reductions through bilateral negotiations, marking a turning point as tariff decision-making power shifted from Congress to the executive branch. After World War II, the world took the lesson of Smoot-Hawley to heart. In 1947, GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, was established. In 1995, the World Trade Organization was founded. The belief that free trade was the path to peace and prosperity dominated the world. The average U.S. tariff rate dropped from 59% in the 1,930 seconds to below 5% by the 1,990 seconds. Global trade exploded, and developing countries, including China, were integrated into the world economic system. This was the era of globalization as we know it. On July 6, 2018, the world witnessed a new trade war. President Donald Trump imposed 25% retaliatory tariffs on 818 Chinese imports worth $34 billion. China immediately retaliated with the same scale. The U.S.-China trade war had begun. Trump called himself the Tariff Man. His logic was simple. America has endured trade deficits for too long. It's time for fair deals. Indeed, the U.S. trade deficit has persisted since 1976. As of 2022, the largest trade deficits were with China, Mexico, Vietnam, Canada, Germany, and Japan. The first Trump administration revived Section 232 of the 1930 Tariff Act and Section 301 of the 1974 Trade Act. Section 232 allowed tariffs on steel and aluminum, citing national security, while Section 301 enabled sanctions on unfair trade practices. South Korea had to limit its export quotas to receive steel tariff exemptions. When the Biden administration took office in 2020, tariff policy did not ease. In May 2024, Biden announced additional tariff increases on Chinese electric vehicles, solar panels, and steel and aluminum products. Tariff policy had become bipartisan consensus across Democrats and Republicans, and in January 2025, Trump returned to power. This time, he was even more aggressive. The Trump II administration invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. By declaring the trade deficit a national emergency, they could bypass congressional approval to impose tariffs. On April 2, 2025, Trump made a historic announcement, calling it Liberation Day, a 10% baseline tariff on all imports with higher reciprocal tariffs for 57 countries. China faced tariffs as high as 145%. According to Yale University's Budget Lab, the average U.S. tariff rate surged from 2.5% to 18.3%, the highest since 1934. Market reaction was immediate. The S&P 500 plunged 4.88%, and the Nasdaq recorded its largest point loss in history. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell warned that the tariffs and their economic impact are much larger than expected. The Economist's editor-in-chief called it the biggest trade policy shock in history. That same afternoon, witnessing the market collapse, Trump quickly changed course. He announced a 90-day suspension of tariffs above 10% for all countries except China. But the tariff war with China continued. When the U.S. raised tariffs to 145%, China countered with 125%, and the two nations kept trading tariff blows. Japan's Nikkei 225 index plummeted 7.8%, and the EU, facing 15% tariffs, had to make broad concessions. Negotiations proceeded with South Korea, Japan, and the EU, but the global economy was engulfed in extreme uncertainty. Goldman Sachs estimated that American businesses and consumers were absorbing most of the tariff costs. Major companies like Walmart, Nike, and Best Buy had already begun raising prices. According to Yale University research, 2025 tariffs increased prices by 1.8%, equivalent to an annual income loss of $2,400 per average household. On April 21st, CEOs of major U.S. retailers warned Trump that escalating the trade war would cause price increases and product shortages within 2 weeks. The situation in 2025 evokes memories of 1930. The entire world is responding with retaliatory tariffs. China, Canada, Mexico, the EU, each nation is raising tariff barriers to protect its industries. Global trade volume is declining. Supply chains are in chaos, and consumer prices are rising. But historians tell us history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. The world of 2025 is different from 1930. The global economy is far more intricately interconnected, and global supply chains have been built over decades. Yet precisely because of this complexity, The ripple effects of a trade war could be even more widespread than in the 1,930 seconds. Economist Warren Buffett said, "Tariffs are essentially an act of war." 250 years of American tariff history leaves us with a clear lesson. Protectionism may protect certain industries in the short term, but in the long run, it harms everyone, just as Smoot-Hawley worsened the Great Depression. No one yet knows what consequences the 2025 trade war will bring. But one thing is certain, tariffs are not merely economic policy. They are a powerful weapon that determines the fate of nations, world peace, and the lives of countless people. We now stand at a critical crossroads in history.